Welcome to Backyard Offset Tribal Council, where 3 out of 4 are getting voted out of Backyard Island. So crash course on quickly how I ended up with 4 backyard offsets for a short period of time, then the decision making behind the 3 that I'm going to sell in terms of how and why I picked that one to get voted out of Backyard Island, and then we'll finish off with the one that I've kept, anything that I've picked up and learned along the way that just helped sort of justify in my mind the decision as this to be my forever offset. So the crash course, I started off with my Carlisle Gen1 about 2 years ago, and this is my first foray into owning my own offset. I've used one before, but never one that I've had to call my own, and I've got this as a benchmark just to test my other cooking. No matter what style of cooker you're using, whether it be something like a kettle, a Kamado, or anything in between, it's easy to get sort of pulled into a bit of a blindside in terms of the quality or the taste of the food that you become accustomed to versus the benchmark. And so I wanted to challenge myself against the benchmark. So that was the original idea behind getting an offset, and boy oh boy has that proved not only challenging in terms of realizing where maybe some of the gaps are a little bit bigger than I thought, but it's also been an inspiration to push and challenge ourselves to get more out of whatever type of cooker that we are using. And this has inspired things like my double indirect method to get a cleaner burning fire, or challenging the water pan assumption in a Kamado Joe. The old rule of you don't need water pans in Kamado Joes or Kamados of any kind is something I put side by side after using water pans in my offset. And once again, sort of when you do these things side by side, you learn an incredible amount of information. And so after about the 2-year mark, it started to be a rumor of a second generation with more space. And at the point after about a year, 2 years of owning this, the only frustration that I had is if I'm going to put all this work into running an offset fire and maintaining that all day versus the almost set it and forget it experience that I get on my Kamado Joe, is I want more food to be able to share with other people. And so, but before taking the plunge, because again, we've bought all these, I'm selling 3 out of the 4. This is not sponsored by anybody, but I wanted to test before signing the check to look at a Generation 2. Is this something that, you know, price and quality are connected? Because again, I've done a whole bunch of inexpensive versus premium, and it's about 50-50 for wins for each category. Sometimes products costing half as much can turn out food just as good. And so that's what led me to pick up my Oklahoma Joes Highland offset smoker at clearance last year at Lowe's end of season. And I've had a blast getting to know it. And like always, I always find a bit of a soft spot for these budget-friendly options. I don't think there should be a luxury financial tax in order to enjoy great barbecue. And so this has been a blast, but after putting it through a whole bunch of tests, and I know this is decisive for some, but the prevailing wisdom here is to use a lot of charcoal to help supplement your coal bed and add wood splits. And to me, this makes food that tastes just like every other charcoal cooker that I have, where we're using charcoal for heat and wood for flavor, and it's not, especially when you do it side by side, comparable with what you get off of a larger offset. Now, I've found a way to burn a nice clean fire, but it just means a lot more interaction. I have to break my splits down to, you know, half or a quarter of a size and be adding them at a much higher level of frequency. Plus, because it's thinner gauge steel, it's not near as energy as efficient, and so we end up going through just as much wood on that 30-gallon offset as I do on something like my 110-gallon offset. And so while this has been a blast getting to know, it did help inform my decision that side by side, taste the food side by side, I can't recreate the exact same flavor profile as you get off of a larger offset. It makes sense. You're burning more wood all the time, getting an easier experience in terms of fire management. And so a couple other reasons I'll go into in a minute behind that one. And so then that leads us to our 2 Generation 2 pits. And so coming from my 60-gallon experience, the Gen 2 Carlisle is now 85 gallons and the Huron is 110 gallons. But I couldn't decide, do I just stick with Carlisle, what I have, and go with a Generation 2 Carlisle? Or do I want to jump up to a 110 gallon? I've done a bunch of things comparing the fuel efficiency, the types of fires, as well as the taste. We ended up buying 2, knowing that the long-term plan is going to be to sell 1 and hopefully recover as much of that cost as possible. So that way we could go to bed at night knowing like, this is the one I want, and not wonder like, should have I got the other one? So that's the path to how and why we got to 4. Now let me lead you through the journey in terms of some of the things that help me decide which one I'm going to keep, as well as the decisions that were behind which of the three I'm not going to keep. So first, let's go through the first offset to get voted out of Backyard Island, which is going to be my Carlisle Gen1. So there's a couple reasons that this one was first. Obviously, we're committed at this point and need to sell 3 out of 4. And so financially, it just doesn't make sense to, keep that one and then take losses on the 2 newer, more expensive models or something like the Oklahoma Joes. Second was the reasons for even doing this whole experiment is I was looking for more space and a little bit more distance in the firebox, and it physically hasn't changed in terms of some of the things that I shared after my 2-year review. And so even though I fell in love with backyard offset cooking and using this as a challenge, this is the first one to go. And for people that have reached out, I already have this one sold, so it's going to be leaving Backyard Island in the next week. The second one that's getting voted out of Backyard Island will be behind me in the Oklahoma Joes Highland. As I mentioned earlier, I've absolutely fallen in love with experimenting with this pit. We've made some upgrades that have significantly improved the performance, whether it be creating a semi-insulated firebox by using bricks, insulated or fire bricks to help maintain some residual heat. Depending on the temperature outside, the Oklahoma Joes is incredibly sensitive in terms of how it can maintain a coal bed. When I first got it, it was in the middle of winter. It was incredibly sensitive to cold air approaching that, since we don't have an insulated firebox and our coal bed would want to die out very quickly. And so this meant you either had to choose one of 2 methods. You go with a popular method, in terms of fire management on the Oklahoma Joes Highland, where you're adding a fresh charcoal chimney of ignited coals every hour or 2 hours to help maintain a coal bed, and then using a larger split so that you can get some smoke. For me, it works perfectly well, so you can maintain a fire, but I have plenty of other charcoal grills where I use charcoal for heat and wood for flavor. And I can assure you that this just does not taste the same as using just wood for heat and for flavor. And so I really didn't want to accept, even though it works perfectly well, this path of using charcoal for heat and wood for flavor, since it gets a result very similar to lots of other charcoal cookers that I have, but it comes with the added benefit of needing to interact with our fire far more frequently. So we don't gain really any advantage in my mind. What I challenge myself instead to do is trying to get it perform like my larger offsets where we're using wood only for heat and for flavor. And you can absolutely do this by adding that semi-insulated firebox. It helps maintain the coal bed and you don't lose your coal. So when you add splits, they combust right away. We've also done an air intake relocation kit. I started with the dryer vent mod. That's one of the really popular ones online. And I did research that. Galvanized steel, it has zinc toxicity risk at about 392 degrees Fahrenheit, but checking it with an IR gun, even at 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which I would never cook at in an offset smoker, the IR gun was reading about 100 degrees lower. But eventually I wanted to test gaining back some real estate, since you lose so much space in an already space constrained environment. I got a little bit more of a compressed air intake lowering kit and was able to gain about 1/5 of my total grid space back. And then the third mod that we made was the chimney extension. So this is a muffler, a 3-inch muffler exhaust pipe from Amazon. And so all these parts together were around $50 US, and they have made a world of difference. And we absolutely can now run a pure wood fire and get significantly better results. But at the end of the day, you are still limited here in terms of capacity. And since one of my original design goals was, if I'm going to go through all the work of maintaining a live fire all day, I want more to share. And even by regaining space, we're really capacity limited to about 3 racks of ribs or 1 brisket. If I contrast that, for example, to my Carlisle Gen2 at 85 gallons with the rib rack extender, I was able to fit 10 full racks of ribs and about 15, 16 racks of ribs on my Huron if I wanted to load it up. So it's just way more space without taking up that much more space in your backyard. For space and ease of fire management, just quickly, if I show you a chart here on the smaller Oklahoma Joes, because we're using smaller splits when you want to run a wood only fire, we tend to get our spike up when the wood combusts and quickly dropping down. So our frequency of interaction is much tighter and our variability in temperature is also much higher. If I compare that to the 110 gallon experience, for example, we're not quite flat line, but it really smooths out. So our duration of needing to interact with a fire gets significantly longer, as well as the variability in terms of the temperatures in our cook chamber is just that much more stable. And maybe it's just the fact that it's easier. Again, we're burning so much more wood and actual dense logs in a larger offset. I find the food taste is just that next level. So for all those reasons, my Oklahoma Joes Highland is offset number 2 to get voted out of Backyard Island. So now, the decision time. Huron Gen 2 or Carlisle Gen 2? So I'll be honest, when I started this, I thought it was already a pre-gone conclusion that the Carlisle Gen 2 would ultimately be what I kept. I decided on the Carlisle Gen 1 originally versus the larger Huron for reasons like space, and I just don't need to take up that much more footprint in the backyard. But seeing them side by side, when again the difference is me standing in the yard, it's really not that big of an impact in terms of the overall space that you take up on the yard. Plus, if I show you the cooking grid difference here, the space is pretty massive between the Carlisle and the Huron. And so this means if I want to, again, one of the original goals is to get more capacity, I can go from, cooking a few briskets on the Carlisle to, 3 briskets, no problem, on the Huron. 10 racks of ribs versus 15, 16 racks of ribs. And so the space differences alone blew me away. There's also more here, even though they both have the same sort of large exhaust stack and chimney. Once the Huron is completely heat soaked, it is just even more stable and approaching flatline temperatures. And this, because we have a larger firebox, nearly 950 pounds of steel once it becomes completely heat soaked, really starts to flatten out and become a breeze to maintain. So I can stretch up to about an hour, particularly now as the weather is warmer versus the middle of dead winter, where I add a fire and I can go away for about an hour at a time versus 15, 20 minutes, contrasting that to a 30 gallon like my Oklahoma Joes. So the ease of use is much higher, the stability in temperatures is much higher, the capacity is much higher, and the impact in terms of the overall yard space is not that different. And you might be thinking, well, what about the cost of running them? And so somehow, again, once these become completely heat soaked, I did a fire management test where I gave each offset about 11 pounds of wood. You'll definitely want to check that out for the complete results. But the spoiler alert here, difference between the Carlisle and the Huron was about 1 stick. So if I added 1 more log, I could have kept the Huron running the same temperature for the same amount of time as I could the Carlisle Gen 2. So there's not even a massive tax on the fuel or the amount of wood and the expense of running it. So given the fact that now the only cost difference is the upfront cost. So it costs about 20% more if I did my math right, but I gain just over 30% more cooking capacity, and the fuel cost is 1 stick difference in terms of being able to maintain a low and slow cooking temperature for a long period of time. So for all those reasons combined, the forever offset that's staying with me is going to be the Huron Gen 2, and Carlisle Gen 2, while it is a significant upgrade and improvement over Gen 1, when I put it side by side and just kind of look for all those reasons that we just covered, it's a no-brainer, and that became almost immediately obvious day one once I got them here and started doing some of these tests, is that this is an absolute no-brainer. So if you're interested in one of the 3 that got voted off of Backyard Island, right now the Carlisle Gen 2 is the only one that's technically still available. Carlisle Gen 1 sold, my Oklahoma Joes Highland is sold, and I have a couple people that have reached out and there's some pending interest, but it, as of today when I'm recording, is still available. So let me know. As I did again buy these, I use my own discount code. I have a save 25% on upgrades for things like the stainless steel cook shelf or the fire grate that I've used to great effect, whether you want to sear a steak. I'm even going to try a pizza in there because I think, again, we can get a nice pizza stone. This has been a great accessory. So all those accessories that I bought for both using my own save 25% code, but I can't keep 2. So that is going to be the one that's available for sale. So reach out if you're interested and I'll let you know where you are on the list. But the other advantage of having all 4 of these is we've been able to do some really cool side-by-sides in terms of taste, fuel consumption and fire management is you do have to build slightly different fires for each offset in terms of getting the absolute best results. So if you haven't seen the fuel consumption video or the fire management video, I'll be sure to link them down below. That's it for today though. I'm James from Smoking Head Barbecue signing off, and remember, don't be afraid to fire it up.